Good afternoon and welcome to day one of ISE here in Amsterdam. Very delighted to have with me today an Associate Director of Futuresource Consulting, Chris Mcintyre. Chris has a team of at least 10 people here doing all sorts of wonderful reports, and I think the first report that you're going to produce is as early as next week.
Yes, indeed.
Which we'll talk about this show.
Yes, so we have a show report. It will be the second time that we've done it. We did it last year. So basically for clients and anyone actually is welcome to come to our site and download it. People that missed the show, which seems pretty crazy to say, I think it's 65,000 people apparently this year. So who would miss it? But yeah, it's a capture all of the display world. So it's not capturing everything across the show. Obviously there's so much going on here that we couldn't capture all of that. So it's really for display enthusiasts.
Well, there's rumours there's going to be 70,000 people here over the 4 days this year. And I know from the report that I read that you wrote last year, it was so worthwhile because there's so many halls, 1,200 exhibitors, you're not going to get around it, or even if you spend all 4 days doing it. Your report was a nice, concise summary of the latest trends.
Thank you, yeah. And we have, we're fortunate that it's Amsterdam, it's relatively local, we're London-based, so we can bring 10, I think, analysts out with us this time. So we can cover most of it, but it's a busy show for everyone, I think. So
yeah, that's brilliant. Now, one of the things that you're in a lovely position of, overseeing the industry, if you like, helicoptering above the whole industry. Megatrends. What sort of megatrends have you seen so far this year, or in the last 6 months, or indeed at the show?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on. But my view is it's never been a more exciting time, really. So we can talk about display choice, and we talk a lot about digital surfaces. So we at Futuresource track front projection, LCD, interactivity, video wall, LED, and we're seeing these all these technologies now blend. We're consistently asked, will one technology replace another? We don't see it that way. We see a place for everything. The projection industry has kind of caught up in the solid state and is going high res now. So I think from a display perspective, it's incredibly exciting, and we can talk more about LED. In fact, we have a report coming up on that in the next few weeks. But that's a really interesting space. Things like collaboration and corporate meeting rooms and how those devices are now coming together and how we're building more feature-rich displays. NEC has its Infinity product here, which is an interesting point. We're bringing camera and speaker together. We have some of the kind of UC guys, so Microsoft Hub sort of brought this forward. Google have bought the Jamboard in association with BenQ, and perhaps we'll see some more vendors join that one, and Cisco have launched its Sparkboard recently, so some really interesting stuff.
Is there a reason why the collaboration thing is so hot at the moment, the huddle rooms, and is that because of social media or the way people live or the way people work, or I mean, what's the driving the need?
I think there's a number of drivers. We are definitely changing the way that we collaborate together. I think there is a drive for quicker, faster, smarter meetings now, so we see less of the scheduled meeting. It needs to be quick and it needs to be small and it needs to be productive. I think there's also a learning point to this where we're seeing students now coming into the workplace who have grown up with fully collaborative experiences and are expecting that in the workplace, and they don't have those tools. And to a certain point we're seeing some of those reach decision-making level as well, so they're having an influence over what AV goes in. I think BYOD is a really important piece to this. A lot of people bringing in their own devices, and how do you connect all that to the network, and then how do you communicate that to the screen? We're clearly seeing a rise in video and the usage of video, and it's one of those crazy things, I think, where as consumers we're used to having video, whether that be FaceTime or Skype, whatever that is. We've been used to that for many years. You go into the average meeting room, it's just not there, but that's starting to change now as well. So I think this whole drive towards sharing content and collaborating, there are lots of things driving that. And I think for display vendors, which is a lot of what we look at, it's how you bring product to market and how far you go into those relationships or building feature-rich products. And everyone's doing things very differently.
Right. That's interesting. We spoke to the Google guy, Mark Grady, I think, on the show this time last year, and he was saying that it was the younger people who were used to the way they interacted with their mobile phone and the way they interacted with FaceTime and whatever else, which was changing the way the collaboration stuff works. But you also mentioned about display manufacturers. If you look at NEC's Infinity Board product, it's one of the first times they've actually produced a proper, true solution. Are you seeing that with other display manufacturers as well?
Everyone's doing it differently. So some, Sharp, for example, are integrating a wireless presentation through We Present partnership, fully into the display. Others are deliberately remaining completely agnostic and relying on kind of expansion slot and PC. I was at the BET show last week, and Dell were very clearly showing a completely agnostic solution with a PC option. So they've gone completely the other way. So I think everyone's trying to experiment with how they fit into this. The big overarching trend is that AV in meeting rooms is beginning to change. But then something we keep on reminding ourselves. If you look at the barcode click share, which has been phenomenally successful, why is that? And the dongle side of that, it's because we all like to have something we can plug in, and it's simple. We don't like that app. It's a generational point, but we don't like that app piece a lot.
I'm smiling at the barcode click share stuff because it's one thing that I know how to use.
Yeah.
And when we put our big conferences on, we always use it and we love it, and we actually ask the meeting rooms or the conference halls to get it in ready for us to put a show on it.
So you talk about a generational point here. We have a very successful grad scheme at our company. We see these guys coming through who can't figure out, well, we want to put a dongle in. Well, why not just download an app and you're away? So it's very clearly generational.
Okay, I'm interested, so obviously your show report out at the end of next week about this show will have details about the huddle rooms and the collaboration, the trends you've seen. Tell us a little bit about the LED, because LED is huge. We talked about this last year when we talked about this 1.5 mil LED that we're using as a backdrop, but it's changed even in 12 months tremendously.
Still exploding. And unfortunately for us, because we put out a relatively aggressive forecast to all of this, and I feel pretty confident we've got that one right. But we see lots and lots of vendors now. If you look across, the classic guys from a display perspective, if you look at the big guys, LG, Samsung, LEDs dominating the stands. We didn't see that a few years ago. I think most display vendors are now recognizing that this is a product that's here to stay, and are trying to figure out how far they go into that as well. Do they try and own some upstream supply chain and take control of that? Do they OEM or ODM, however they take that route out? But if you're not in LED, I think it's an issue now, and so we see everybody coming to market with that. It is a very fluid space. We're still seeing this chasing pixel pitches. I just saw some 0.7 demos. At some point that needs to stabilize. I think we can't really go down too much further without a step change in componentry, which there are some things coming. If you look at Sony's micro-LED Cletus product, absolutely stunning. So we will see some of that come forward, but I think once we see that pixel pitch begin to stabilize, I think then we'll see a real shakeout of how the market looks, because there are so many players in this space, and it's a very difficult market to comprehend and put together, which is obviously what we try and do in our reports.
Are there products that have died as a result of the rise in LED, and how does OLED fit into the whole story?
Not died. I think it's an interesting point here where, if you look at the history of all this, we've been tracking rear projection cube for 15 plus years, and that was the original tile display technology. Then we had PDP video wall, but really LCD came through, and we had some very aggressive forecasts for that, outwards to 1 million units. I think in my time at the company, which is kind of 13 plus years, the single biggest forecast change we've ever made over a year basis was made on the LCD piece, because LED has just come through so strongly. We're starting to hear people talk about replacing rear projection cube in control room environments. We're even starting to hear people talk about LED for cinema spaces, and we've got some coming up for some replacement cycles for cinema projectors. So there's lots of things going on where LED is competing, and my view is it will continue to compete, but it still has some quality issues, I would say, to overcome, and usage issues to overcome, but it's here to stay, and it's doing phenomenally well.
Last year you had a unique-ish perspective on both, I think, ISE's 4th day and ISE's role in the calendar. So you guys would already have covered BET this year, the education market. You're here, ISE, you think that's the big. How does that fit with the rest of the shows? Because you must be one of the only guys who do Infocom China, Infocom in the US, etc. Where does ISE fit within the rest of the calendar?
You mean in terms of importance or scale or everything? Both. For me, it's the absolute premier show now. And again, I think I mentioned this last year. Infocom, when I started at the company, was the trade show. All the HQs used to time their visits out to that. I think that's flipped on its head now. ISE is the must-go-to. We see a lot of product launches here. We don't tend to see as much at Infocom. So for me and my team, this is probably the single most important show. There are lots of regional shows and things that you can go to, so many of these things. For us still, it's ISE, Infocom, and then you have various segment-specific shows like NAB and IBC and BET for the education piece, and CES and IFA for our consumer guys. So yeah, I mean, as a company, we attend a phenomenal amount of shows, and I think that's really important. Just to bring up on that point, never have we worked so closely with our counterparts in other divisions. If we look at the team coming back from CES, a lot of the learnings on AI and voice and video and all of these things now, we're beginning to talk about in our world. Why don't we see voice control out on this show? We're starting to see some people talk about it, but the CE world are leading that, so we have to learn from those guys, and the same in the broadcast space. So there's a lot of learning to be had. VR, AR, mixed reality, all of these things now. For me, the B2B space is where some of the really true benefits of those products really are. In the consumer world, there's scale, but in our world, I think there's some fantastic usage cases, which doesn't get enough coverage.
Interesting. And the last question is really, if you're coming to the show, it's a big show, 65, 70,000 people, 1,200 exhibitors. What's the one thing that you think people should look for before they leave the show?
Ooh, good question. My view would personally be, if you're not looking at LED, look at it. You can't really miss it. But for me, and with my display cap on, there's so many things going on here. If you're into building automation, there's a whole hall. If you're into signage, as you know, there's a whole hall. It really depends what you're interested in. Audio, we're starting to do a lot of work in. With my display hat on, I just think what we are seeing with LED and the creativity around LED, where we're beginning to dress buildings in it, and seriously do that. LED lighting, there's just such a wave of momentum behind it that if you're not aware of it, it's pretty crazy. You should be, but LED is definitely the one I would look at.
Chris, thank you very much for being on the show.
Wonderful, thank you for having me.